This is Share the Load. I'm Mia Schachter. I'm an intimacy coordinator for TV and theater and a consent educator. Today I'm talking to Rebekah Rose, who will introduce themselves.
Thank you. So I'm Rebekah Rose. I'm super excited to be here with you, Mia. Thanks for having me on. I am many things. I am a visual artist, illustrator, muralist. I'm also a somatic consent educator. I did my training with you. And what's the other one? Oh, I'm a yoga teacher. I'm a trauma-informed yoga teacher. I've only been doing that for 8 years. So I do yoga, art, and everything in between, how they relate to each other. I love teaching. It's easily one of my favorite things to do. So, yeah.
Me too. I did not set out to be a teacher, and here I am. And I'm with you. It's one of my favorite things. Can you share pronouns?
Oh, yes, and my pronouns are they and she.
Great. I wanted to start today, and maybe this will be something I'll do with everyone, by asking you to define consent.
It's such I feel like a nebulous request. Every time I come up with a definition, I'm like, but what about like this additional nuance I'm not quite capturing? But for me right now, what's feeling good is consent as an ongoing practice of physical and emotional safety that we have with ourselves, like keeping ourselves safe, as well as with others and those we're in relationship with. So that would be like my short definition.
I love that. That's awesome. I'm also curious how, I've known you now for like almost a year, yeah?
Yeah, I think so. Wow,
Yeah.
time flies.
I know. I'm curious how your relationship with consent has changed. And I think there's maybe like, in the last year version of that question, and then there's like over the course of your life question. So I'll let you just decide how you want to answer it.
Yeah, that it's an interesting question. So what I would say for my like personal journey, I'll start with more of like the wider course of my life is first maybe soft trigger warning. Um won't go into any detail, but like in high school, I was a victim of sexual assault, and I feel like my understanding of consent was like totally non-existent in that category, and dealt with like the very like typical experiences of like this is my fault or this is unfair, all of that, and not realizing like consent wasn't possible in that situation. So like even like thinking like going into high school, there's like one really popular video that like most colleges use. It's like the analogy of like you don't give a sleeping person tea. Then like my understanding of consent became very like conflated with permission giving. But it also became like a big source of empowerment for me because as I started to get more into my creative practices and I got into reading and writing poetry and doing like light organizing with my campus for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and I was performing a lot of poetry, like it like felt like it was an outlet for like anger, as well as sadness. But like again, it felt empowering and it felt like something I could connect over. And now more recently, especially in the last like year since I've encountered your work, my understanding of consent has completely changed. And like I really see consent now, I feel like as a mindfulness practice. Because I have studied mindfulness for quite some time now, and I've noticed like mindfulness is all about like somatics, noticing your thoughts, noticing how you feel, being like really aware, self-aware. And I feel like consent is the same thing with just slightly different language. Um, so, like the previous feelings of like anger, sadness are now feel much more related to like joy and connection. Um, yeah.
Wow. That's I that whole you like just took me on a journey and that was really cool. I also like you said the word anger and like an engine revved out your window. I was like, wow, that's so on point. I love where you're going with consent as a mindfulness practice. I completely agree. And for me, like the history of that of thinking about it that way starts with finding acting. For me, in my early 20s, like around 20, I think, I found I was living in New York and I found an acting teacher. I hadn't really been aware of this, but all the acting classes that I had taken in LA growing up here were really geared towards TV and film. And in New York, most of the acting classes that you find are really geared towards theater. Um, and so that was really my first exposure to like acting for theater, which is extremely process oriented. It's all about being in the moment. I mean, I would say all acting is, but when you're, in television, it's like you do a take, you do it again, you do it again, and then you switch camera angles, you do it again, you do it again, do it again. It's a bit of a different thing. Whereas like acting for theater is it's all about the rehearsal. The final product to me was like sort of almost irrelevant. And it's all about being present. It's about listening. It's about attunement to yourself and others. It's about reacting honestly of the moment without any preconceived expectations. And so that became a mindfulness practice for me. It was at the time kind of the closest thing I'd ever had to like a religion or a spiritual practice. I was raised Jewish, but it was very secular. And now I would say I'm actually a religious Jew, but it's a different thing. So then when I found consent work, it felt like this sort of logical extension of this way that I had been thinking about acting. And I started to think about this difference between acting and performing. You see performing in reality TV and you see performing in a lot of porn. But when you're watching people really act, they're trying to get at some deeper truth and like human, something about the human condition. And so now I even think about like on the yes to no spectrum, like acting is very much on the yes side and performing is very much on the no side. Um, so hearing you talk about it as a mindfulness practice, I know that you're talking about yoga or like that's some of your context, but I'm also very interested in how that has been part of your creative practice.
Oh yeah. So my creative practice has changed a lot over the years. So like I was mentioning like when I was in college, or more specifically when I was in community college, which was some years ago now, uh, I was really focused on like poetry, and I feel like I didn't really know how to like express myself at all prior to writing poetry. Like it did not make sense to me. I was not at all able to like advocate for myself or like communicate a moment where I'm like that didn't feel right. I don't like that. Like writing poetry and finding a way to turn it into a metaphor or play with sound and alliteration, like that really taught me how to express myself. And then when I was able to express myself, I was like, and also like got some positive feedback from it. Like people were like, you were not bad at this. And I was like, wonder if there's anything else I'm not bad at. And so then I took an art class and it was just like an intro to drawing. And then I was just like, yeah, this is it. This is the thing that I want to do. And what's interesting about going through art school, I feel like you have to learn how to do a bunch of stuff you don't want to do. Like I had to, do a lot of like academic drawing, and like working towards realism, and I'm like I don't really care about making something realistic. I love cartoons. I'm here for outlines. Um, but finding a way to take that and like take it with a grain of salt, like, yes, this is valuable experience, even if it's not like exactly what I want to do. Um, and figuring out like how to still make it my own. Um, so I like have all that experience in school, but then I feel like what started to happen is I noticed like I could use art to emotionally regulate. So I have these like really colorful little drawings, and I remember I was going through like a breakup kind of moment, and I was like very sad. I'm like, I really want to cheer myself up. And so I just started doing these like really cute, really wholesome little drawings of like little dudes floating around on balloons and like playing like on a pogo stick and like playing in flowers. And like I was able to like improve my own mood just by like choosing to draw something that like made me laugh. And
That's huge.
yeah, so there I'm sure there's a lot more that I may be glossing over in this moment about like my art practice, but that was something that was really beautiful for me to notice. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, one of the things that I found with consent that has been such a surprise, and I've talked about a lot on here, is the way that it has enhanced my creative practice and the ways that it has removed a lot of resistance around creativity and making things. And also, it has forced me to reckon with my inner critic, with my imposter syndrome, and with my perfectionism in a way that has made creativity so much more accessible to me. Like it's just lower hanging fruit. It's like I can reach it really easily. And then another part of that is that I started journaling every single day a little over 3 years ago. And that has completely transformed my creative practice. And given me an incredible like relationship to self that I can revisit. It's also now becoming the basis of a book that I'm writing. Yeah.
Yay.
Thank you. And hearing you talk about it, I think the thing that has surprised me so much is that people keep telling me that consent, like they're noticing this relationship to their creativity changing, and that it's giving them, like, consent education is giving them tools to express themselves in all these new and subtler and more nuanced ways. And that is leading to an increase in their confidence because they trust their own ability to like explain their state and change their state and communicate their truth and be understood.
Hmm. Yes, I feel that connection. And I think one of the examples that I was trying to like remember was there was a moment where I was drawing and I felt myself getting like insanely frustrated with the drawing. And then I realized, and I checked in with myself. I was like, what's going on here? And I realized like I was trying to start a painting, which was like a very different experience of drawing than like the experience of wanting to like unwind and relax, because I realized that's what I was trying to do. So I completely like shifted gears, and instead of like trying to start this painting that I finished, but
Nice
I
job.
finally finished 7 years
Congratulations.
later.
That's great.
I did it. But instead of like trying to like do these like kind of thumbnail sketches, I realized like I just want to like draw cute frogs. And so then I spent an hour just drawing cute frogs, and it was really fun, and I felt so much more relaxed. And I'm really glad I had that awareness of like self consent, of like I'm not actually doing the thing I want to do right now by trying to draw this specific way. So how can I draw differently in order to accommodate where I'm at?
That's so important. Okay, I'm going to plug a podcast, a different podcast. I think it's called Moonbeam, and Annika Honstein Azora was just on it, and they just did my educator training. And Annika uses he, she, and they pronouns, so I'm gonna switch them up as I talk. So he was talking about creativity and consent, because a lot of Annika's work has to do with like creativity as spiritual practice, and this whole idea of like being in consent with yourself in order to have that relationship with your creativity, where sometimes you perhaps like put on your calendar, okay, like tomorrow I'm going to dedicate all this time to like finishing this painting or working on this part of my book, and allowing yourself to say no sometimes. While also, and you already kind of touched on this about art school and like having to learn to do things that you don't necessarily want to do, like there are aspects to creativity and also aspects to like working for yourself or having any kind of job where you're like, I have to do these things and I don't want to. And like, where does, my question is always like, okay, well then in what ways am I going to care for myself before, during, and after that thing? As opposed to sort of just like doing it begrudgingly, or the worst thing you can do, which is like try to convince yourself that it's actually something that you want.
Hmm.
Like if like I took a welding class but maybe you're like, well, I'm not interested in welding, and but you're like, but you like have to, for the major or whatever, to like complete your requirements. Like the worst thing you can do is be like, well, maybe I'll love it, or like, I can like convince myself that it's like a really positive thing, or it's a skill I should have, or whatever. The better thing to do, I think, would be like, right, I don't want to do this. So I'm going to make sure that I'm like well rested before. I'm going to make sure that I have, maybe my fidget toy or my stress ball or my breathing techniques while I'm doing it. And then afterwards, I'm going to, eat a peanut butter cup or like whatever the plan is. But better to do that, I think, than, and when it comes to creativity, sometimes, yes, I allotted the time and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do it. And sometimes I'm going to allow myself not to, but there are going to be times where I'm going to sit down and I'm going to have that conversation with myself of like, you know what, you have a meeting with your editor tomorrow. So how can we get to a place where this is not like something that you have to suffer through, but rather something that you can support
Mm-hmm.
yourself through and then like care for yourself after.
Yeah, I think when I teach yoga, something I like bring up a lot to my students is like the idea of feeling safe enough. Because like sometimes we like try to promise like this is a safe space, but then like you don't know that it is. You don't know what everyone's experience is. Maybe you say something that's triggering and it doesn't feel safe anymore. So even if you do feel a little triggered or there's this resistance of like I don't want to do this thing, like how can you reach this space of feeling safe enough to be present or safe enough to do the thing? Uh,
That's huge. And I think sometimes the feeling of safe enough comes from giving yourself permission to say no. Sometimes you say no and then you go, oh, actually, now that I know that I can say no, I'm a little more open to doing this. Oh shit, Rebecca, I just muted you and can't unmute you.
I'm back.
You got it. Okay. Whoops. Now I know. Yeah. What does that make?
I don't know.
I know we just had a hiccup and now
Had
it's
a
hard to.
moment. Reset. I feel like saying no gives you just a lot of like space to chase what you actually want. And I feel like my relationship to no has changed a lot. And like, I love when people feel safe saying no to me. I'm like, yes, say no to me, please.
That's
Because,
so
yeah,
important.
when they say yes, of course, it just means so much more.
Right. I've been thinking a lot about this. I mean, I think I've thought about this a lot over the course of the last several years, but like especially recently where it's very hard to trust someone if I don't think they can say no to me. So like, I have a friend where I've often been concerned that she like would sort of people please her way like out of the friendship by just like never telling me that something was wrong or that I said something or did something. And um she's one of my best friends, and sometimes there's like these moments where I'm like I want to ask for a favor, or I could use her help with something, or her would really value her opinion on something. And because I don't trust her to say no to me, I often just won't ask. I just won't ask. And that it's making me think of your frog who says like when you ask me for help, it gives me a chance, an opportunity to be closer to you. Like I feel like sometimes there are these moments where like we could get closer or build trust or build intimacy in our friendship, but because I don't know that she would say no to me, I don't extend that opportunity for us to get closer. And then it raises the question of like, because I think that creating the space for someone to say no to you is like it is a mutual effort. Like it's a shared responsibility. There are certain things that I can do to make it easier for someone to say no to me, and I have a list of those things, and it's on my Instagram and it's in a class that I teach. But there's also a responsibility on the other person's part. And I'm all, of course, we're all in both positions all the time, where like I also have to be able to say no to people. Like if that's something that I'm struggling with, then yes, they can create the conditions that are going to make it easier for me, but I still have to be able to say it. um yeah, so it's like this like communal effort of like holding boundaries, of saying no, of all those things feels like it's I don't know, it takes me to this thing of like a lot of times with consent education, people are looking for this like really clear way to like not hurt people ever. I hear that over and
Oh,
over. Like,
yeah.
I don't ever want to make anyone uncomfortable. And I'm like, okay, so the first thing we have to do is like get rid of that impulse, because that's simply impossible. And normally people hear that and they actually feel really relieved, because then you can dedicate your efforts toward like doing better and toward like repair and things like that. But you get to relinquish this like attempt at perfection. um but yeah, anyway, this idea of like that boundaries are a communal effort, and like saying no is a communal effort, it muddies that for people. Like they're like, but then how do I make sure that I'm not doing it wrong? And I'm like, you can't.
You're like, good
Sorry.
luck.
Yeah, right. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you.
Yeah, that brings a lot up. I think I'm like, especially that for me, like the last like 2 weeks or so, I feel like I have just like messed up so many times.
Me too. I've made a lot of mistakes in the last month, I'd say. It's been a lot of processing around mistakes I've made.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay, I need to slow down because I'm realizing I'm not handling myself well, and I think I just need to like slow down and remember like why do I like just existing? How can I like focus on my joy outside of like trying to build a career or trying to help people or whatever? Just like can I just have a quiet morning alone?
Hmm. Yeah, I really like where you're going with that. I think there's, especially when I've made mistakes, whether it's like interpersonally, one on one in my personal life, or like in a class like I did a few weeks ago, or on Instagram like I did last week, in these more public forums, like there is a way that urgency can take over, and often that's being sort of requested or even demanded by other people, like
Mhm.
apologize now. And it's like, well, I got to figure out what I like what I'm truly apologizing for, and I got to figure out how to like prevent how to like demonstrate that remorse, like in my actions, not demonstrate the remorse, but I mean like, put that into practice. And I want to make sure that, because I can just say sorry out loud, but like I want to make sure that I'm understanding. I want to make sure that I'm recognizing what I did, and I want to make sure that I'm like showing through actions that I've learned. Because just saying it is like kind of just lip service. And I think there's a sense of urgency that I feel around like, oh no, how do I fix this? How do I fix this? How do I fix this? So I really like where you're going with this, that it's like maybe those are actually moments to like do less and slow down and take your time. And even, in these mundane moments, like eat breakfast without multitasking, or like go for a walk without my phone, like those kinds of things.
Yes, exactly. Because when like we slow down, like that is what's giving us the energy to do the things we want to do. And like I mean I struggle because I have a lot of things that I want to do, and like I'm like 89-99% sure I have ADHD, which would explain most of my life.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, that's why I'm always carrying like five conversations at once and never doing one thing at a time. Which like in a lot of ways I'm like, this feels like a superpower, but when I like leave it unchecked for too long, I'm like, I feel like I'm swimming in a pile of chaos. And how can I pull myself out of that?
Hmm.
And it always goes back to slowing down. It also always goes back to the body. Like, how does my body feel?
Right.
I got sick. I got like really sick twice back to back the last like
Oh,
month and a half. Was like out for a full week both times.
wow.
So I'm like, body's trying to say something to me. Am I actually like listening?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. What do you think it's telling you?
Slow down.
Slow down. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I'm doing too much because
Yeah.
I'm like not only was I sick, but then I got into like two like pretty back to back moments, and this is where one of the memes that Layla and I made came from, of like not wanting to disappoint my friends, but being honest with myself about my capacity. Is like I got into two back to back moments where I like just messed up and disappointed people, and then
Yep.
got called out on disappointing them, and then completely shut down, like unable to think.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, okay, yes, you want to help, yes, you need help, or you want to do all these things, but like if you're getting so dysregulated when you realize like you've made a mistake that you like can't formulate a sentence,
Right.
like this should not be as big of a deal as it is.
Well, I mean, the should in there,
Right.
like you're experiencing it. I think I'm relating to that so much. I mean, I think one of the things that I recognized in one of the fuck ups that I made recently was like that sometimes I'm gonna receive feedback or like recognize that I've done something wrong or harmful, I'll say, and I will freeze. And when I freeze, I kind of like, it becomes sort of dissociative. And so, like, I'm even watching myself and I'm like, what is going on, Mia? Like, you know how to handle this. What are you doing? And then it's only later that I'm like, who was that? Like that is not how I want to operate. That's not how I think of myself. Like what happened there? Um and yeah, so this idea of like slowing down and tapping into the body, and it's really interesting that, the result for you was illness. I want to make sure, you just brought up Layla and these memes, and I want to ask you about this class that you're offering. Can you tell everyone about it?
Yes. Oh my god, I'm so excited. So we're doing a 5-day class, boundaries and consent for teenagers. So it's going to be ages 14 to 18, and it will just be like an intro to boundaries and consent. I'm thinking of it like the education that should be the prereq for any education that your school gives you on sex or sexuality, or just communication in general, because I don't necessarily think like the heart of the class is going to be talking about like sex or romance or physical touch. It's much more about like how do boundaries and consent, how does it come up in like much smaller moments, like if I'm not able to tell my friend that I don't want to go to the mall with them, and I can't like feel comfortable and confident like saying no to like just hanging out, how would I ever be able to say no when the stakes are higher? So
Right.
it's, destigmatizing consent and talking about boundaries and why they matter, and like everything that I like wish I had known or wish that anyone was talking about when I was a teenager. Because I think about like social media, everything I'm seeing online now, I'm like I don't even think I knew what boundaries were until like my mid 20s.
Right.
And now I'm like, I can't
I
go
don't
a
even know.
day without hearing someone talk about it.
You can look on Google at like the like trends of words and like how much they've been used and searched.
Hmm.
And the search for boundaries went way up in the last 10 years. And before that, like people were looking it up, but it was like way, 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 way less frequent. Um, I remember rewatching the entire series of The OC a few years ago. Maybe that was last year. I can't remember. And it was like three and a half seasons in before anyone mentioned the word boundaries. And like now I
Hmm.
feel like you see people talk about it on TV all
Oh
the
yeah.
time.
I feel like your relationship to the OC is my relationship to Gossip Girl.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, in the first episode, there are like multiple assaults that are just like, oh, that's
Oh,
just his
huh.
personality trait.
Right.
Like,
Yeah, I know. It's interesting. Like, I think that, okay, so we're getting into the way that like consent pervades everything. And we're also, the way that I teach consent and the way that I know that you think about consent is this like very non binary way. And I think one of the things that I'm sure will show up in the class is the ways that like not only are you having your boundaries pushed sometimes, but like you also push other people's boundaries. Like we are all doing both. We are all like violating other people's consent either because we don't know or because we have a need or like for whatever reason. And a need that we can't get met or we don't know how to get it met or we don't know how to ask for it, things like that. And I'm thinking about like when I got like when I look at sort of, like all the moments in my life that brought me to this work, it's like, yes, I did have violations. I also experienced a sexual assault, say even perhaps a number of sexual assaults, and a number of consent violations that were like in the realm of, um, I don't know how to explain, like unwanted texts and like things like that, like some kind of like harassment type of thing, but like not physical touch. And then so okay, yes, like I've had those experiences, and I think this is really important. I've also recognized the ways that people have told me throughout the course of my life that certain people in certain situations have told me that it's hard to say no to me, have things that I did without thinking it through all the way that I discovered were like not okay, or that I shouldn't have done, or that were harmful. And like, we have to be recognizing both of those things so that we're not just like pointing the finger at other people. This is like the communal effort thing. It's like we're all sharing this responsibility, and that requires us to look at ourselves and the ways that we have perpetuated the the misinformation or the misunderstandings around consent and boundaries because of our own lack of education.
Yes, absolutely. I love like I just like everything you just said. Amazing. I think one of my like most powerful teaching moments was a time someone was like, "Hey, Rebecca, you caused me harm."
Yep.
And I was like, I went through all of the feelings. I was like, I never want to cause anyone harm ever at any time ever for any reason. Oh my god. But then being like, I'm so grateful you told me because I had no idea. And part of it, like in the specific situation I'm thinking about, is like largely because it was about I touched someone's hair without permission. And I'm like, in my mind, I'd never even thought about it because I'm like, people are always touching my hair. My hair is very curly. People like make comments about my hair all the time. And like, I'm like, oh, people touch hair. But I didn't have like the association of like the trauma that could be attached to that as it relates specifically to like a Black person's hair. So it was like a very eye opening moment for me. And I'm just like so grateful to that they trusted me enough to tell me I did something wrong. And I think that's going to be an important piece of the class as well, of like, when people come to you with how they feel, it is a beautiful act of trust.
Yes.
Uh, and it is an opportunity to grow closer.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something that my dear friend CJ Kitten Miller shared with me. She's been looking into attachment theory and shared that the like secure attachment is not born out of like a lack of conflict. It's actually born out of repair. So like if there is conflict or there is a rupture or there is harm, the secure attachment comes from the repair. Which is a fascinating thing. And I've been thinking about this in terms of accountability as well, because in order for me to like practice being accountable, I have to fuck up. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? It's like, so, okay, in order for us to have secure attachments, we have to have ruptures. And that's very complicated. That's a really hard thing to grapple with, because it's like, okay, I fucked up recently, so I practiced accountability, and there are certain things about how I went about it that I'm looking at in hindsight, and I'm like, I would do this a little differently. I would do that a little differently. Um, but in order to do it differently next time, there has to be a next time. And then
Right.
I have to be like, all right, I'm gonna fuck up again. And,
Totally. You're like, oh, I'm back in this place. I
yeah,
don't like it here.
I don't like it here. But,
But
you were talking about the like freezing thing and, not being able to formulate a sentence. And it's like, okay, well, this time I was able to formulate a sentence. That's great. That's like vast improvement. Like I was able to remember to breathe. Okay, that's really positive.
mhm. You know what? This is bringing up a poem for me that I really like cherish, and I feel like I
Oh,
revisit at least once a year. That I
mm-hmm.
found in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying.
Wow.
I'm spacing out on what it's called. I don't even remember. Like, but I think it's called something like "There's a hole in the sidewalk," and it's just like written in 5 parts. And the stanzas, each time you like fall into this hole and it's the same place, but like each time you fall into the hole you gain a new awareness about it until you make a new decision. I'll send you the poem.
Yeah,
It's one of
I'd
my
love to see it.
favorites.
If you can send a link to it too, I can
Oh,
put it in the show
oh,
notes.
definitely. I would. Yes,
Okay,
yes.
cool. Well, I'm aware of the time. And is there anything else that you'd like to share about the class itself?
I would say like I'm still, playing with the outline. I have something planned. It's 5 classes, 75 minutes each class, and I am working on making sure there is a good balance between uh discussion slash lecture, but also just like experiential stuff because we're promoting somatic consent. So I think having like time dedicated for just somatic practice is really important to me. So there will be an opportunity for like just some yoga or a creative activity. I'm planning on doing some kind of creative activity. So I think it's going to be like really well rounded and just a good introduction for something that can develop for a lifetime. Really.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And Layla, who was on the podcast recently, is supporting you in that. And we can say it's January 2nd to 6th, right?
Yes.
Yes. And
Yes.
it's an hour and 15 minutes for each session in the afternoon on the West Coast and the evening on the East Coast. And you can sign up for that through my website, consentwizardry.com. There's also, I will post a link to the class in the show notes as well.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, can you tell everyone where to find you?
Yes. So I have. I'm like, which one do I want to share? I'm starting to use it, so I'll just say my
Yeah.
Instagram for consent education is at everyday moments, and it's every with 3 R's and a period between the moments. Which I'm like, please link that because I don't know if that was the best description.
Of course.
um, and I also have a website, which is RebekahRoseArt.com, and Rebekah is spelled with a K-A-H. So yeah, Instagram and my website are probably great ways to get in contact with me. I have my emails on my website. So
Cool. I'm just remembering something that I was going to say earlier when we were talking about slowing down and how you've been like moving really quickly. And the from where I'm sitting, I've watched you have an enormous amount of success very quickly. Yeah. Like with murals, with getting your new job, with moving into your first apartment by yourself, and like, you've really been like blossoming and expanding in a lot of new ways. So there's a sense of like that's been happening very quickly, and this invitation to slow down is, perhaps a little bit about that as well, like around, you know, success, like that's just been happening really fast.
my mind is just like, like, right, all of that happened very fast. I graduated
Very
college like a
fast.
year ago.
Very, very fast. Yeah.
Yeah. Adjusting to a 9 to 5 has been an adjustment,
Yeah. Yeah.
to
It's
say
a,
the least.
yeah. I mean, I've had one of those and it was brutal. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Rebekah. It was really a pleasure having you, and I'm so excited to see how this class unfolds.
You too. I'm really, really looking forward to it. Yeah, thank you for like letting us use your platform
Oh,
and
my pleasure. That's what
for
it's
just
for.
being you in this world and being like visible in the public.
Well, thanks, Rebecca. It's, that was like my goal when I learned about consent was to make this information as widely accessible as I possibly could. And it's been really amazing to see the way that like the Instagram has grown and the educator training has grown, and like that it is really moving outward, like with and without me in incredible ways. So the platform is a community platform. Like that was always the intention, and that's really what I hope to do with it.
Great. Cool.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
I appreciate you. The last thing that I will say, which I was supposed to say in the middle and I forgot, is
Oops.
that please do write a review and rate the show on whatever platform you're listening to it on, because it really helps the algorithm. Like it'll start to put this show like up towards the top when people search like related search terms. So if you can do that, that would be amazing. I'd also recommend checking out my dear friend Amelie's podcast, Winesplaining. She's editing it and doing the music. That is a podcast about women winemakers, hosted by the people who own Vinavore in Los Angeles. And if you're interested in taking a class, I have the Consent Mini, a 2-day course in December on the 5th and 7th. If you join my newsletter, you get a 10% off discount. And actually, you know what? I'll tell you right now that you can get 20% off of all my upcoming classes through Christmas Day if you use the code PREZZIES, PREZZIES, all capitals. I'm also taking a few more one-on-one clients. And if you would like to advertise on the podcast, I have a link to a form with all the information that you need on my site under the podcast tab, or you can email me at podcast@sharetheloadinc.com and I will send it to you. Our music at the beginning is no longer by me. Amelie Rousseau did that. She's on Instagram at Sophia Bolt. She's an amazing musician, and she is also looking for podcasts that need an editor. So if you need editing on your podcast, she is available to do that. All right, that's all I got. Thanks for sitting through that with me, Rebekah. I appreciated the moral support.
Of course. My pleasure.
All right, thank you. Until next time.